In the beginning, before telescopes pierced the heavens and microscopes revealed hidden worlds, humanity gazed upward at the night sky and wove stories to explain the mysteries dancing above them. Long ago, ancient peoples across the world looked at the same moon we see tonight and created tales of lunar deities. The Chinese spoke of Chang'e, who drank an elixir of immortality and floated to the moon where she lives eternally, while the Greeks told of Selene driving her silver chariot across the darkened sky. These weren't merely fanciful stories, but humanity's first attempts to understand the celestial dance above, passed down through generations around flickering fires. Yet today, we know the moon holds no palace of immortal goddesses. Science has revealed that our lunar companion formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago, likely when a Mars-sized object collided with the early Earth, sending debris spiraling into orbit that gradually coalesced into the silvery sphere we admire. The moon doesn't generate its own light as ancient peoples often believed, but rather reflects the sun's radiance back to us, a cosmic mirror suspended in the velvet darkness of space. But here's where folklore and science begin their beautiful conversation. Those ancient moon myths weren't entirely wrong in their observations. People noticed the moon's gravitational pull on our world long before Newton described the mathematics of gravity. Fishermen and farmers knew the moon controlled the tides, that its phases influenced their catches and their crops. What they attributed to divine will, we now understand as gravitational forces, yet their observations were remarkably accurate. The moon does pull at Earth's oceans, creating tidal bulges that sweep across our planet, rising and falling in a rhythm that life has danced to for millions of years. Consider, too, the phenomenon of the full moon. For centuries, perhaps millennia, cultures worldwide believed the full moon affected human behavior, giving us the very word lunacy from the Latin luna. Hospital workers and police officers still often insist they see more chaos during full moons. Modern scientific studies have largely debunked the idea that full moons increase emergency room visits, crime rates, or unusual behavior. The data simply doesn't support these lunar legends. Yet the belief persists, perhaps because the full moon is so visually striking that we remember the unusual events that happen to coincide with it, while forgetting the countless uneventful full moons that pass overhead. This is what psychologists call confirmation bias, our tendency to notice evidence that supports what we already believe. As we drift further into this exploration, let us travel from the moon down to the Earth itself, where another ancient belief took root in cultures separated by vast oceans. Many societies believed that the Earth itself was alive, conscious, breathing with intention. The Greeks called her Gaia, the primordial goddess who birthed the world. Indigenous peoples across continents spoke of Earth as mother, a living entity deserving respect and reciprocity. For most of scientific history, this seemed like pure poetry, a beautiful metaphor with no basis in reality. The Earth was simply rock and water, chemistry and physics, nothing more. But then something remarkable happened. In the 1970s, scientist James Lovelock proposed the Gaia hypothesis, suggesting that Earth functions as a self-regulating system, maintaining conditions necessary for life much like an organism maintains its own internal environment. While Earth isn't conscious in the way ancient peoples imagined, modern science has discovered that life and the planet exist in such intricate feedback loops, the atmosphere's composition regulated by living things, the climate influenced by forests and oceans, that in many ways, the ancient intuition wasn't so far from truth. The boundary between the living and non-living on our planet is far more blurred than we once thought. This is the gentle rhythm we'll follow through this journey together, not folklore versus science as opponents in some grand debate, but as conversation partners across time, each holding pieces of truth, each seeing the world through different lenses. Sometimes the old stories were entirely mistaken, sometimes science reveals them as metaphors for deeper truths, and sometimes, just sometimes, ancient wisdom observed what science would take centuries to explain. So settle in, let your mind wander gently through these borderlands between myth and measurement, story and study, and let us see what wisdom emerges when we hold both. As moonlight gives way to dawn, let us turn our attention to something even more fundamental than the celestial bodies above, the very air we breathe, the wind that has whispered through human consciousness since our earliest days. Ancient peoples felt the wind's invisible touch and created elaborate mythologies to explain its mysterious presence. The Greeks spoke of the anemoi, the wind gods who lived at the four cardinal directions: Boreas, the fierce north wind of winter; Notus, the warm southern wind of late summer; Eurus from the east; and Zephyrus, the gentle west wind of spring. These weren't abstract concepts but divine beings with personalities, intentions, and moods that could bless sailors or dash ships against rocky shores. In Japan, wind carried its own divine messenger, Fujin, the kami of wind, depicted carrying a large bag of storms over his shoulders. When he released the winds from his bag, typhoons would sweep across the islands. Norse mythology spoke of a giant eagle named Reisvelga whose wing beats at the edge of the world created all the winds that swept across Midgard. Across the Pacific, Polynesian navigators told stories of Maui slowing the wind to help voyagers cross vast ocean distances. Each culture, in its own way, gave personality and purpose to the invisible force that bent trees and filled sails. Today, we understand wind through the language of meteorology and physics. Wind is simply air moving from areas of high pressure to low pressure, driven by the uneven heating of Earth's surface by the sun. The equator receives more direct sunlight than the poles, creating temperature differences that set vast rivers of air in motion around our planet. The Coriolis effect, caused by Earth's rotation, curves these winds into the predictable patterns that meteorologists map and sailors depend upon. There are no gods in bags, no giant eagles at the world's edge, just thermodynamics and fluid dynamics, elegant in their mathematical precision. And yet, once again, the ancients weren't simply telling fanciful tales. They had observed something profound. Wind does indeed come from different directions with different qualities. The north wind genuinely brings cold air from polar regions in the northern hemisphere, just as Boreas was described. The south wind carries warmth from equatorial zones. Modern meteorology has confirmed what ancient peoples knew intimately, that prevailing winds have distinct characteristics, temperatures, and moisture contents based on where they originate. The Greeks gave these patterns names and stories, we give them isobars and weather maps. Both systems arose from careful observation of the same natural phenomena. Consider, too, how folklore about wind often contained practical survival knowledge wrapped in myth. When Pacific Islander navigators spoke of wind gods, they were simultaneously transmitting detailed knowledge about seasonal wind patterns essential for navigation across thousands of miles of open ocean. These stories were mnemonic devices, ways of encoding meteorological data that could be remembered and passed down through oral traditions. A young navigator learning the tale of Maui and the winds was also learning when it was safe to sail, which routes to take during which seasons, and how to read the sky for approaching weather. The mythology was the medium, the message was survival. Let us drift now from the winds of the external world to the winds within, the breath that animates us. Many ancient traditions believed that breath was the very essence of life itself, something sacred and divine. The Hebrew word rosh means both breath and spirit. The Sanskrit prana refers to the vital life force carried on the breath. The Chinese concept of qi flows through the body with each inhalation and exhalation. Greek philosophy spoke of pneuma, the breath of life that separated the living from the dead. When breath departed, so too did the soul. This was universal human observation, expressed through spiritual frameworks. Modern medicine understands respiration as a biological process. Oxygen enters our lungs, diffuses across delicate membranes into our bloodstream, binds to hemoglobin, and travels to every cell in our bodies where it enables the chemical reactions that produce energy. Carbon dioxide, the waste product, travels the reverse journey and is expelled with each exhalation. There's no mystical life force, just gas exchange, elegant biochemistry that every breathing creature on Earth shares, from the smallest shrew to the largest whale. Yet recent research has revealed something that ancient breath-focused traditions somehow intuited. The way we breathe profoundly affects our physical and mental state in ways that go far beyond simple oxygen delivery. Studies have shown that controlled breathing practices, the kind taught in yoga for thousands of years, can directly influence the autonomic nervous system, reducing stress hormones, lowering blood pressure, and even affecting gene expression related to inflammation and immune function. The ancient practitioners who sat in meditation focusing on their breath weren't just engaging in ritual, they were accessing a biological mechanism science is only now beginning to fully understand. They called it cultivating prana, we call it vagal nerve stimulation and parasympathetic nervous system activation. Both describe the same reality. And what of sleep itself, this mysterious state we're gently approaching together? Every culture has woven stories about sleep and dreams, recognizing them as portals to other realms. The Greeks believed that Hypnos, god of sleep, and his son Morpheus, shaper of dreams, would visit mortals each night, transporting them to another dimension of existence. Many indigenous traditions speak of dreamtime as a reality equally valid as waking life, where spirits communicate and future events are revealed. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia describe the dreamtime as the foundation of reality itself, our eternal realm accessed through sleep and sacred ritual. Science now knows that sleep is a complex biological necessity, cycling through distinct stages, from light sleep to deep slow-wave sleep to the rapid eye movement stage where most vivid dreaming occurs. During sleep, our brains consolidate memories, clear metabolic waste through the glymphatic system, and process emotional experiences. Far from being a passive shutdown, sleep is intensely active neurologically, essential for learning, health, and survival. Mammals deprived of sleep will eventually die, sometimes even before they would die from starvation. Such is the fundamental importance of this state ancient peoples recognized as sacred. But here, in this space between waking and sleeping, between the stories our ancestors told and the equations our scientists solve, we find perhaps the deepest truth, that wonder itself bridges both worlds. Whether we say Morpheus shapes our dreams or that our visual cortex remains active during REM sleep, creating narratives from neural noise, either way, each night we close our eyes and enter a realm of profound mystery, where impossible things seem real and the boundaries of self dissolve into strange and beautiful visions. So as your own eyelids grow heavy, know that you follow a path every human who has ever lived has walked before you, into the ancient darkness that restores and renews, carrying the breath that ancient peoples called spirit and modern science calls respiration, under the same moon that inspired both Chang'e and Apollo missions, moved by winds that are both invisible gods and pressure systems, always and forever held by an oath that might not be conscious but sustains consciousness. Nonetheless, in the depths of sleep, we sometimes find ourselves walking through forests, those ancient, primordial places that have captured human imagination since we first stood upright beneath their canopies. Trees have always held a special place in folklore, standing as they do between earth and sky, their roots reaching into darkness while their branches stretch toward light. The Norse people spoke of Yggdrasil, the world tree, an immense ash that connected all 9 realms of existence. Its roots touched the underworld, its trunk passed through the realm of humans, and its highest branches brushed the halls of the gods. This wasn't merely a tree but the very structure of reality itself, and when Yggdrasil trembled, all the worlds would tremble with it. Celtic traditions revered individual trees as sacred beings, each species holding particular wisdom and power. The oak was the king of the forest, associated with strength and endurance. Druids, whose very name may derive from the word for oak, performed their most sacred rituals in oak groves, believing these trees served as doorways between worlds. Across the ocean, the Maya civilization held the saber tree as sacred, believing it connected the 13 levels of heaven, the earth, and the 9 levels of the underworld, its roots and branches forming a cosmic axis much like the Norse Yggdrasil. Half a world away in Japan, ancient Shinrin-yoku traditions spoke of forest bathing as a spiritual practice, absorbing the essence and energy of trees for healing and harmony. Modern science has revealed that trees are indeed remarkable, though perhaps not in the ways ancient peoples imagined. We now know that forests are not collections of individual trees competing for resources, but rather interconnected communities communicating through an underground network that ecologist Suzanne Samar calls the Wood Wide Web. Through symbiotic relationships with fungi, trees share nutrients, water, and even chemical warning signals about insect attacks. A mother tree can recognize her own offspring through this mycelial network and preferentially send them resources. The forest, it turns out, is far more connected and cooperative than early Western science assumed. Ancient intuitions about the forest as a unified living system weren't metaphor but observation of a reality science took centuries to confirm. And those Japanese forest bathing traditions? Research has now demonstrated that spending time among trees measurably reduces cortisol levels, lowers blood pressure, and boosts immune system function. Trees release organic compounds called phytoncides, natural oils that protect them from insects and disease, and when humans breathe these compounds, our bodies produce more natural killer cells that fight infection and even cancer. The ancient practice of seeking healing in forests has been validated by immunology and environmental medicine. Our ancestors didn't understand the chemistry, but their bodies responded to it nonetheless, and their wisdom preserved practices that modern medicine is now rediscovering and prescribing. Let us wander deeper now, from the forest into the realm of water, that element which covers most of our planet and makes up most of our bodies. Water has always been sacred in human cultures. The Ganges River is holy to Hindus, the Jordan River to Christians and Jews, the Nile was worshipped as a god by ancient Egyptians. The Greeks believed that every spring, every river, every body of water had its own presiding nymph or deity. Naiads dwelled in freshwater springs, Oceanids in the great oceans, and Potamoi personified the rivers themselves as living, thinking beings. To pollute water was to offend the divine, to honor water was to honor life itself. Many cultures also believed that water possessed memory, that it could be blessed or cursed, that it carried intentions and could be influenced by prayer or ritual. This seemed like pure superstition to the scientific establishment for generations. Water is simply HO, 2 hydrogen atoms bonded to 1 oxygen atom, its properties determined by chemistry and physics, nothing more. How could a molecule remember anything or respond to human intention? Yet water continues to surprise scientists with its anomalous properties. Unlike most substances, water expands when it freezes, which is why ice floats, a quirk of molecular structure that has profound implications, preventing lakes and oceans from freezing solid from the bottom up, thus allowing aquatic life to survive winter beneath protective layers of ice. Water has an unusually high heat capacity, meaning it can absorb vast amounts of energy without dramatically changing temperature, which is why oceans regulate Earth's climate and why our water-filled bodies maintain stable temperatures. Water molecules form transient hydrogen bond networks that constantly break and reform, creating structures that last mere trillionths of a second, a kind of molecular memory, though not the kind ancient peoples imagined. Some researchers continue to investigate whether water's unique properties might allow for more complex information storage than we currently understand, though such research remains controversial and at the very edges of established science. What isn't controversial is that our bodies recognize the importance of water at the deepest levels. We are drawn to water instinctively. Research in environmental psychology has shown that views of water, sounds of flowing streams, and proximity to bodies of water consistently reduce stress and promote psychological well-being across cultures. This phenomenon, sometimes called blue mind, suggests our brains have evolved to find water calming and restorative. Perhaps this is because water meant survival to our ancestors, finding water meant finding life. The spiritual reverence for water encoded something our bodies already knew, that water is not just a resource but a requirement, not just chemistry but the very foundation of our existence. As we float now between waking and sleeping, like leaves drifting on that sacred water, let us consider one more ancient observation, the phenomenon of synchrony, of rhythm, of patterns that repeat. Ancient peoples noticed that women living together often found their menstrual cycles aligning, that cicadas emerged in mysterious synchronized patterns, that fireflies in certain forests would flash in perfect unison. These observations made their way into folklore and tradition, often attributed to lunar influences, to the harmony of nature reflecting cosmic order, to invisible forces that connected all living things. For many years, science was skeptical of such claims. The idea of menstrual synchrony, while widely believed, proved difficult to confirm in controlled studies, and researchers debated whether it was merely coincidence and selective memory. But other forms of biological synchrony have proven undeniably real and more mysterious than folklore suggested. Those fireflies do indeed synchronize their flashing through a process scientists call coupled oscillation. Each firefly adjusts its rhythm based on the flashes it sees around it, and through this simple mechanism, thousands of insects create breathtaking displays of emergent coordination without any central conductor. Cicadas of certain species do emerge in prime-numbered cycles, 13 or 17 years, a mathematical pattern that helps them avoid predators whose own cycles might synchronize with more common intervals. Even our hearts seek synchrony. When musicians play together, their heart rates begin to align. When a mother holds her infant, their heartbeats influence each other through proximity and breath. This isn't mystical connection but rather the physical reality that we are oscillating systems. Our hearts, our breath, our brain waves all follow rhythmic patterns, and these rhythms can influence one another through mechanisms we're still working to fully understand. The ancient intuition that all things are connected, that invisible threads link living beings to each other and to the cosmos, reflects something true about the nature of biological systems, even if the mechanisms are neurological and chemical rather than magical. So as your own breath finds its rhythm, as your heartbeat slows into the peaceful cadence of approaching sleep, know that you are part of these great patterns, these ancient synchronies that connect you to every human who has ever drifted into dream, to the forests that breathe oxygen for you to inhale, to the water that flows through your veins as surely as it flows through rivers, to the very pulse of life itself that beats in rhythm with forces both understood and still mysterious. The boundary between folklore and science grows softer here, in this twilight space, where both speak truth in their own languages, where the ancients and the moderns both reach toward understanding the beautiful, complex, interconnected web of existence we all share. In this quiet space between thoughts, let us turn our attention to the stars once more, but not to the moon we began with. Instead, let us consider the vast tapestry of constellations that have guided travelers, marked seasons, and inspired countless stories across the ages. When ancient peoples looked up at the night sky, they didn't see random points of light scattered across darkness. They saw patterns, pictures, stories written in fire across the heavens. The Greeks saw mighty Orion the hunter, forever pursuing the Pleiades across the sky. The Chinese saw entirely different patterns in the same stars, a white tiger in the west, an azure dragon in the east, marking the celestial realm into quarters that reflected the harmony of the universe. Indigenous Australians have perhaps the oldest continuous astronomical traditions on Earth, with stories of the sky passed down for more than 40,000 years. They saw not just the stars but the dark spaces between them, the cosmic emu, a dark constellation formed by dust clouds in the Milky Way, whose position in the sky told them when emus on Earth would be laying their eggs. Aboriginal elders encoded practical knowledge into these stories. When certain stars appeared on the horizon, it was time to harvest certain foods, to move to different territories, to prepare for changing seasons. The night sky was their calendar, their map, and their library all at once. Modern astronomy has revealed that these stars are not fixed lights embedded in a celestial sphere, as most ancient peoples believed, but rather suns like our own, at vastly different distances from Earth. The stars that form a constellation often have no physical relationship to each other at all. They simply happen to lie in the same direction from our perspective, creating an illusion of connection. Orion's shoulder, the red supergiant Betelgeuse, is about 700 light-years away, while his foot, Rigel, shines from roughly 860 light-years distant. They are not companions striding together through the cosmos, but strangers separated by incomprehensible gulfs of space, appearing close only from our particular vantage point in the universe. And yet, here is where we must pause and acknowledge something profound. Those ancient constellation patterns served humanity brilliantly for thousands of years. Sailors navigated across vast oceans using star patterns passed down through generations. Farmers planted and harvested according to celestial calendars that proved remarkably reliable. The fact that the stars aren't actually connected to each other doesn't diminish the usefulness of the patterns humans perceived in them. We still use these ancient constellations today. Astronomers divide the sky into 88 officially recognized constellations, many of them derived directly from Greek and Babylonian traditions thousands of years old. The International Astronomical Union didn't invent new, scientifically pure divisions when they standardized the celestial coordinate system. They honored the patterns that human minds have found meaningful across millennia. Let us drift now from the permanence of stars to something more fleeting, the phenomenon of rainbows, those bridges of light that appear and vanish like promises. Nearly every culture on Earth has rainbow mythology. In Greek tradition, Iris was the goddess of the rainbow, a messenger who traveled between the realms of gods and humans on her bridge of light. Norse mythology spoke of Bifrost, the rainbow bridge connecting Midgard, the realm of humans, to Asgard, the realm of gods, a structure both beautiful and functional, magical and necessary. Irish folklore placed leprechauns at the rainbow's end, guarding pots of gold. In Judeo-Christian tradition, the rainbow appears after the Great Flood as God's covenant with humanity, a promise that the waters would never again destroy the world. The rainbow as a bridge or connection between earth and sky, between humanity and the divine, appears across cultures separated by vast distances and thousands of years. This recurring theme suggests something about how human minds interpret this optical phenomenon. We see in the rainbow a linking of separate realms, a joining of opposites, water and light becoming color. Science explains rainbows through the physics of refraction and reflection. When sunlight enters a raindrop, it bends as it passes from air into water, reflects off the back of the droplet, and bends again as it exits. Different wavelengths of light bend at slightly different angles, separating white sunlight into its component colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. The rainbow isn't actually somewhere in space that you could walk to. It's an optical effect that exists only in the interaction between sunlight, water droplets, and the observer's position. Every person sees their own unique rainbow, positioned at a specific angle from the sun through their particular perspective. Move to a different location, and you see a different rainbow. There is no pot of gold at the end because there is no end. The rainbow is always the same angular distance from your eye, receding as you approach, a phantom arc of light. Yet consider this remarkable truth. The rainbow is a bridge of sorts, a connection between observer and phenomenon. It cannot exist without someone to see it, not because it's imaginary, but because it's a relationship between light, matter, and consciousness. The water droplets are real, the sunlight is real, the physics is real, but the rainbow as an experience requires an eye to perceive it. In this sense, the ancient intuition that rainbows connect realms holds a deeper truth than simple optical physics might suggest. They connect the physical world of light and water with the experiencing world of perception and meaning. They remind us that reality isn't just what exists objectively out there, but also how we encounter it, interpret it, and weave it into our understanding. Now let us consider something even closer to home, the phenomenon of healing, of recovery from illness, of the body's remarkable ability to repair itself. Every traditional culture developed healing practices, and nearly all of them included elements that modern medicine might call superstitious: prayers and incantations, ritual objects, ceremonies performed at specific times. Ancient Egyptian medicine combined sophisticated surgical techniques with magical spells. Traditional Chinese medicine speaks of qi flowing through meridians that anatomy textbooks cannot locate. Indigenous healers worldwide performed ceremonies invoking spirits to aid in recovery. Medieval European medicine relied on the theory of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, that simply don't exist as described. For a long time, scientific medicine dismissed all of this as primitive ignorance, effective only when it accidentally aligned with real biochemistry. Willow bark helping pain because it contains salicylic acid, the basis for aspirin, not because of any inherent willow spirit. The history of medicine has largely been written as a story of replacing superstition with science, ritual with pharmaceutical intervention, belief with mechanism. But then researchers discovered the placebo effect, and the story became more complex. When patients believe they are receiving treatment, their bodies often respond positively even when the treatment is pharmacologically inert, a sugar pill with no active ingredient. This isn't all in the mind in any dismissive sense. The placebo effect produces measurable physiological changes. Brain imaging studies show that placebos can trigger the release of endorphins and dopamine, the body's natural pain relievers and reward chemicals. Placebo treatments can reduce inflammation, lower blood pressure, and even improve immune function. The belief in healing initiates actual healing processes in the body. This doesn't validate every ancient healing practice. Some were genuinely harmful, and modern medicine has rightfully replaced them with safer, more effective treatments. But it does suggest that the ritual, the ceremony, the healer's confident manner, the community support during healing rites, all of these elements that traditional medicine wrapped around its treatments may have had real therapeutic value beyond the herbs or techniques employed. When a shaman performed an elaborate healing ceremony, the patient wasn't just receiving whatever medicinal plants were administered, they were also receiving a powerful message that they would heal, delivered in a culturally meaningful framework that engaged their belief, their community, and their own body's healing systems. Modern medicine is slowly rediscovering what traditional healers intuitively knew: that healing is not just a mechanical repair of damaged tissue but a complex interaction between body, mind, expectation, and social context. The best contemporary healthcare tries to combine the precision of modern pharmacology and surgery with attention to the patient's experience, their beliefs, their support systems, recognizing that both matter, that both contribute to outcomes. As your own body rests now, moving through its nightly repair processes, cells dividing to replace damaged ones, immune cells patrolling for threats, neural connections reorganizing based on the day's experiences, you're engaged in healing whether you're aware of it or not. This is the gift of sleep, this restoration that happens in darkness, this ancient process that both science and folklore recognize as essential, as magical in the true sense, transformation that occurs in ways we can study but that still inspire wonder. The line between what our ancestors called magic and what we call biology grows ever thinner as we understand more about how interconnected everything truly is. The body that heals itself through belief, the rainbow that exists in the relationship between observer and light, the stars that guide us regardless of whether they are actually connected, the healing that comes from both chemistry and ceremony. All of this reminds us that truth has many layers, that understanding can come through story and through equation, through myth and through measurement, and that perhaps the deepest wisdom lies not in choosing between them but in honoring both, in recognizing that humanity has always been reaching toward truth with whatever tools we had available, whether telescope or tale, microscope or myth. And so we rest here, in this space where ancient and modern wisdom meet, where the boundaries blur, where all knowledge is simply humanity's long conversation with mystery. In this deepening quiet, let us turn our attention to something that lives in the shadows and the margins, the creatures that share our world but move through it differently than we do. Animals have always occupied a liminal space in human consciousness, being both like us and utterly foreign, and so they became central figures in folklore across every culture. The ancient Egyptians saw divinity in animals, depicting their gods with animal heads, Anubis with the head of a jackal, Horus with the head of a falcon, Thoth with the head of an ibis. These weren't merely symbolic choices but reflected a belief that animals possessed wisdom and power that humans needed, that they moved between worlds we could not access. In many indigenous traditions, animals serve as totems, as spiritual guides that connect individuals and clans to particular qualities and teachings. The bear represents strength and introspection, the eagle carries prayers to the heavens, the spider weaves the web of fate and creation. These weren't primitive misunderstandings of animal behavior but rather a way of encoding deep observations about how different creatures navigate existence, what survival strategies they employ, what we might learn by watching them carefully. When a tradition speaks of eagle medicine or wolf wisdom, it's preserving generations of careful observation about how these animals move through their worlds, the eagle's far-seeing vision from great heights, the wolf's cooperation and complex social bonds. Modern biology has revealed that animals are far more sophisticated than even the most respectful folklore imagined. We now know that ravens and crows can solve multi-step puzzles, plan for the future, and even hold what appear to be funerals for their dead, behaviors that suggest a level of cognition that challenges our assumptions about consciousness and intelligence. Elephants recognize themselves in mirrors, demonstrating self-awareness, and they mourn their deceased, returning to the bones of lost family members and touching them gently with their trunks in what can only be described as remembrance. Octopuses, whose last common ancestor with humans lived over 500 million years ago, have developed complex problem-solving abilities and personalities entirely independent of the evolutionary path that led to human intelligence, a second genesis of mind on our planet. Dolphins have been found to use specific signature whistles as names, calling to each other as individuals across distances. Whales sing songs that change over time like human musical trends, with new variations spreading through populations in patterns that resemble cultural transmission. Bees perform elaborate dances to communicate the location of flowers to their hive mates, encoding distance and direction in movement, a symbolic language that shares fundamental properties with human language. The more we study animal cognition and behavior, the more we discover forms of intelligence, culture, and even language that ancient peoples intuited when they spoke of animal wisdom, even if they expressed it through the vocabulary of spirits and totems rather than neuroscience and ethology. Let us move now from the wisdom of animals to another force that ancient peoples both feared and revered: fire, that transformative element that separates humans from nearly all other creatures. The Greek titan Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, suffering eternal punishment for this transgression. In this myth, fire represents not just warmth and light but knowledge itself, technology, the power to transform the world. Many cultures have similar stories. The Polynesian demigod Maui snared the sun and stole fire from his ancestress in the underworld. Cherokee tradition tells of a water spider who brought fire across the water to the people when larger animals had failed. Australian Aboriginal stories speak of the fire hawk, kites and falcons that deliberately spread wildfires by carrying burning sticks in their talons to flush out prey. These fire myths encode a profound truth: fire changed everything for humanity. Control of fire allowed our ancestors to cook food, making nutrients more available and reducing the energy needed for digestion, which some anthropologists believe contributed to the development of our large, energy-hungry brains. Fire provided warmth, extending the range of climates we could inhabit. Fire offered protection from predators, as most animals fear flames. Fire became the center of social life, the hearth where stories were told, knowledge was passed down, where community was forged in the dancing shadows. In a very real sense, fire made us human, or at least made possible the particular form of humanity we became. Science now understands fire as rapid oxidation, a chemical reaction between fuel and oxygen that releases energy as heat and light. We can describe it in terms of activation energy, combustion temperatures, and the molecular bonds being broken and reformed. Fire isn't an element as ancient peoples believed: earth, air, fire, and water, but rather a process, a transformation of matter from one state to another. And yet, the ancient reverence for fire captures something essential that pure chemistry might miss. Fire is special, fire is transformative, fire does separate us from other animals in profound ways. Those Aboriginal stories about firehawks? Scientists have now confirmed them. Black kites, whistling kites, and brown falcons in Australia's Northern Territory have been observed picking up smouldering sticks from existing fires and carrying them to unburned areas, deliberately starting new fires to drive out small animals they can then catch. This isn't folklore or exaggeration, it's documented behavior that researchers are still working to fully understand. These birds are using fire as a tool, engaging with this transformative element in ways that blur the line between animal and human innovation. The ancient storytellers who spoke of firebirds weren't imagining, they were reporting what they had observed, wrapping it in narrative that would preserve the knowledge and convey its significance. Consider also another element that ancient peoples knew intimately: salt, that mineral that preserves, that flavors, that was once so valuable it gave us our word salary, from the Latin salarium, the salt allowance given to Roman soldiers. Salt appears throughout mythology and folklore as a protective substance. In Japanese tradition, salt purifies and wards off evil spirits. Sumo wrestlers throw salt into the ring before matches to cleanse the space. In European folklore, salt spilled was bad luck, and throwing a pinch over your left shoulder could ward off misfortune. Slavic traditions placed salt at doorways to prevent evil from entering. The Romans said that sharing salt created a bond of trust. To betray someone you'd shared salt with was among the worst of treacheries. These traditions arose because salt was genuinely essential to survival in ways ancient peoples understood viscerally. Before refrigeration, salt preservation was the primary way to store meat and fish through winter, through long sea voyages, through times of scarcity. Communities with access to salt deposits or coastal salt production had wealth and power. Trade routes formed around salt transport. The Via Salaria, the ancient Roman salt road, was one of the oldest roads in Italy. Wars were fought over salt resources. Salt was literally worth its weight in gold in some times and places, a form of currency as reliable as precious metals. Modern physiology has revealed why humans crave salt with such intensity. Sodium is essential for nerve function and muscle contraction, including the heart muscle. Our bodies can't produce sodium, we must obtain it from food. For most of human evolutionary history, salt was relatively scarce in the diet, found mainly in meat and some vegetables. Those individuals who strongly craved salt and sought it out had survival advantages, so natural selection gave us powerful salt appetites. In today's world where salt is abundant and cheap, this ancient craving can lead to overconsumption, but the drive itself reflects the genuine life-or-death importance of this mineral throughout most of human existence. The folklore that treated salt as precious and powerful wasn't superstition but recognition of biological truth. As we drift further into this space of rest and renewal, let us consider one more pairing of folklore and science, the phenomenon of metamorphosis, of transformation, of creatures that change from one form into another. Butterflies appear in myths and folklore across the world as symbols of the soul, of resurrection, of transformation. The ancient Greeks believed that Psyche, whose name means both soul and butterfly, transformed from a mortal woman into a goddess, growing wings like a butterfly in her apotheosis. Many cultures see butterflies as the spirits of the dead, returning briefly to visit the living. In Mexican tradition, monarch butterflies arriving for Dia de los Muertos are believed to be the souls of departed ancestors coming home. Japanese culture associates butterflies with both departed souls and young women, symbols of beauty and transience. The transformation from caterpillar to butterfly seems so miraculous, so impossible, that it naturally became associated with the equally mysterious transformation from life to death to whatever might come after. How could a crawling creature enter a chrysalis and emerge as something with wings, something that could touch the sky? It seemed like death and rebirth made visible, a natural symbol for the soul's journey. What science has discovered about metamorphosis is somehow even more astonishing than the myths imagined. Inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar doesn't simply grow wings and rearrange itself. Instead, it largely dissolves. Digestive enzymes break down most of its tissues into a cellular soup called imaginal soup, a name that sounds like pure poetry but is scientific terminology. Within this soup float clusters of cells called imaginal discs that have been present since the caterpillar was an embryo, waiting dormant through the entire larval stage. These cells now activate and organize, building an entirely new body plan from the dissolved material of the old one. The butterfly that emerges is constructed from the raw materials of the caterpillar but is, in a profound sense, a different organism with a different body structure, different organs, different capabilities, even different behaviors and instincts. Some research even suggests that butterflies may retain certain learned memories from their caterpillar stage, though how this is possible when the brain itself is largely reconstructed remains one of biology's deep mysteries. The caterpillar, in essence, does die. Its form, its structure, its way of being in the world dissolves, and yet continuity persists, and something new emerges that carries forward some essential thread of identity. The ancient intuition that the butterfly represents death and resurrection wasn't merely symbolic, it was recognition of an actual process of transformation that science, for all its understanding of the cellular mechanisms, still finds somewhat mysterious and certainly wondrous. And so we see, again and again, that our ancestors were not foolish in their observations, not primitive in their understanding. They watched the world with careful eyes, noted patterns, drew conclusions, and wrapped their knowledge in stories that could survive the generations. Sometimes their explanations were wrong in mechanism but right in observation. Sometimes they encoded practical knowledge in mythological language. Sometimes they intuited connections that science would take centuries to confirm. And sometimes, just sometimes, they touched mysteries that science still hasn't fully unraveled, leaving us with questions wrapped in wonder. The animals that teach us through their ways of being, the fire that transformed us, the salt that sustains us, the butterflies that dissolve and are reborn, all of these ancient teachers continue their lessons, speaking now in the language of molecules and neurons and ecological relationships, but teaching still the same fundamental truths about existence, about transformation, about the intricate and beautiful complexity of the world we inhabit together. In this deepening stillness, let us turn our attention to the earth beneath our feet, to the solid ground that ancient peoples knew was far from simple or inert. Across cultures, humans have told stories of the earth trembling and shaking, of mountains spewing fire, of the ground itself opening up to swallow cities. The ancient Greeks believed that earthquakes were caused by Poseidon, god of the sea, striking the earth with his mighty trident when angered. The Japanese told of a giant catfish called Namazu who lived beneath the islands, restrained by a deity who held a great stone over the creature's head. When the god's attention wavered, Namazu would thrash, and the earth would shake. In Hindu mythology, the earth rests on the backs of elephants, who stand on a turtle, who floats on a cosmic ocean. When these great beings shift their weight, mountains tremble and valleys form. These weren't idle fantasies but attempts to explain terrifying phenomena that could destroy entire communities in moments. People living along the Ring of Fire, that horseshoe of volcanic and seismic activity encircling the Pacific Ocean, developed rich traditions about the Earth's violence because they experienced it regularly. Their myths served multiple purposes. They explained the inexplicable, they provided psychological frameworks for coping with catastrophe, and often they preserved practical knowledge about warning signs and safe responses. Modern geology reveals that earthquakes result from the movement of tectonic plates, massive sections of Earth's crust and upper mantle that float on the semi-molten rock below, driven by heat convection deep within the planet. Where these plates meet, pressure builds over years or centuries until the rock suddenly slips, releasing energy as seismic waves that ripple through the earth. Volcanoes form where molten rock from deep within the earth forces its way to the surface, often at the boundaries between plates or over hotspots where plumes of superheated material rise from near the core. There are no gods with tridents, no cosmic catfish, just the slow, powerful physics of a planet that is still cooling from its formation 4.5 billion years ago, still churning and shifting, still very much alive in the geological sense. Yet once again, folklore preserved important observations. Many cultures noted that animals behaved strangely before earthquakes, dogs barking frantically, birds fleeing, fish leaping from ponds. Scientists long dismissed these reports as superstition or confirmation bias, but recent research has found that some animals may indeed sense approaching seismic events. They might detect the initial P waves that travel faster than the more destructive S waves and surface waves, or perhaps they sense changes in groundwater, electromagnetic fields, or gas emissions that precede major quakes. While we can't yet use animal behavior for reliable earthquake prediction, the folk wisdom that paid attention to these signs wasn't entirely wrong. It observed real phenomena, even if it misunderstood the mechanism. Let us move now from the Earth's movements to something equally mysterious that happens within the Earth, the formation of crystals, those geometric marvels that have fascinated humans since we first discovered them glittering in caves and river beds. Ancient peoples attributed magical properties to different crystals and gemstones. Amethyst was believed to prevent intoxication. Its name comes from the Greek amethystis, meaning not drunk. Clear quartz was called frozen water by many cultures, including the ancient Greeks who believed it was ice so deeply frozen it could never melt. In traditional Chinese medicine, jade was thought to have healing properties and to preserve the body after death, which is why important figures were sometimes buried in jade burial suits comprising thousands of jade pieces sewn together with gold or silver wire. Medieval lapidaries, books about stones, assigned specific virtues to each gem. Rubies could warn of danger by changing color, sapphires promoted chastity and revealed fraud, emeralds could shatter in the presence of poison. While these specific claims have no basis in physical reality, they reflect humanity's long fascination with these perfect, beautiful objects that the earth produces, natural forms of such regularity and symmetry that they seem almost artificial, as if crafted by intention rather than by natural process. Modern crystallography has revealed that crystals are matter in its most ordered state, atoms or molecules arranged in repeating three-dimensional patterns that extend in all directions. This regular internal structure is what gives crystals their characteristic flat faces and geometric shapes. The particular arrangement depends on the chemical composition of the material and the conditions under which it forms, temperature, pressure, the presence of other substances. Diamonds form deep underground under extreme pressure and heat, their carbon atoms locked in a rigid lattice that makes them the hardest natural material. Quartz crystals grow in silica-rich solutions, their silicon and oxygen atoms stacking in precise hexagonal patterns. Snowflakes are ice crystals, each one unique in its details yet all following the same hexagonal symmetry dictated by the molecular structure of water. What's remarkable is that crystals represent nature's geometry, matter organizing itself into mathematical patterns without any conscious designer. They demonstrate that order can emerge from simple rules repeated countless times, each atom or molecule following local rules about bonding and position, and from these simple interactions, complex and beautiful structures arise. In a sense, crystals are frozen music, rhythm made solid, mathematical relationships expressed in mineral form. And while crystals don't have the magical properties ancient peoples attributed to them, they do have remarkable physical properties that modern technology depends on. Quartz crystals vibrate at precise frequencies when electricity is applied to them, which is why they're used in watches and computers to keep accurate time. Silicon crystals, carefully grown and precisely cut, are the foundation of all modern electronics, the semiconductor chips that power everything from smartphones to spacecraft. Liquid crystals twist and align in response to electric fields, which is how LCD screens display images. Ancient peoples valued crystals for beauty and supposed magic. We still value them, but now also for their practical applications in technology that would seem far more magical to them than any medieval lapidary could imagine. Let us drift now from the solid and eternal to something more ephemeral, clouds, those shapes that form and dissolve in the sky, that ancient peoples read like books written in vapor. The Chinese practiced a tradition called yunzai, cloud reading, interpreting the shapes and colors of clouds for divination and weather prediction. European folklore held that certain cloud formations presaged storms, while others promised fair weather. Sailors developed elaborate systems of cloud interpretation, encoded in rhymes like red sky at night, sailor's delight, red sky in morning, sailor take warning. Indigenous peoples in various regions had detailed cloud classifications and knew which formations meant rain was coming, which meant wind, which meant the weather would hold. These folk traditions were practical meteorology, dressed in the language available to pre-scientific cultures. People who lived and died by the weather, farmers, sailors, shepherds, learned to read the sky because their survival depended on it, and they passed this knowledge down through generations, wrapped in memorable verses and stories that ensured its preservation. Modern meteorology classifies clouds into distinct types based on their altitude and formation mechanism: cirrus, stratus, cumulus, nimbus, and various combinations thereof. We understand that clouds form when air rises and cools, causing water vapor to condense around tiny particles of dust or salt into countless microscopic droplets that collectively become visible as clouds. Different cloud types form under different atmospheric conditions and are associated with different weather patterns. Cumulonimbus clouds, towering formations that can reach the stratosphere, produce thunderstorms. Cirrus clouds, thin and wispy at high altitude, often precede warm fronts. Stratus clouds form in stable air and can produce light, steady precipitation. That old sailor's rhyme about red sky? It actually has meteorological validity. Weather systems in the mid-latitudes generally move from west to east. A red sky at sunset means the air to the west, where tomorrow's weather is coming from, is dry and clear, scattering blue light and letting red wavelengths through. A red sky at sunrise means the clear air is to the east, behind you, while potentially stormy weather approaches from the west. The folk wisdom was empirically accurate, based on centuries of observation, even though the people who chanted those rhymes didn't understand the atmospheric optics or the large-scale circulation patterns that made them true. Now let us consider something that exists at the very boundary between matter and emptiness: sound, the phenomenon that carries voice and music, thunder and whisper. Ancient peoples recognized sound as powerful, even sacred. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the syllable Om is the primordial sound from which the universe emerged, the vibration that underlies all existence. Aboriginal Australians speak of songlines, paths across the land that were sung into existence during the dreamtime, musical maps that encode geography, lore, and story simultaneously. In ancient Egypt, the god Ptah spoke the world into being, creating reality through sound. The biblical tradition holds that God spoke creation, "Let there be light," and the word itself caused light to exist. These traditions recognized something profound: that sound is creative, that it moves through space and affects matter, that it can build up or break down, heal or harm. Sacred chants and prayers weren't just symbolic acts but were believed to have real effects through the power of sound itself. Temple architects in many cultures designed sacred spaces with acoustics in mind, creating resonances that made chanting more powerful, more immersive, more transformative for those present. Science now understands sound as vibration traveling through matter, pressure waves moving through air or water or solid materials, alternating compressions and rarefactions that propagate outward from a vibrating source. Sound requires a medium; it cannot travel through vacuum because there's nothing to compress and expand. The pitch we perceive depends on frequency, how many compressions pass a point per second. The loudness depends on amplitude, how much the pressure changes with each wave. Different materials transmit sound at different speeds, slowly through air, faster through water, fastest through solids like steel where molecules are tightly packed. But here's where ancient intuition meets modern discovery: sound does affect matter in remarkable ways. Cymatics, the study of visible sound, reveals that vibrations create patterns in sand, water, and other materials. Different frequencies produce different geometric patterns, some simple, some astonishingly complex. This isn't mysticism but physics. Standing waves create nodes and antinodes, points of stillness and maximum movement, and particles accumulate or avoid these regions according to the vibrational pattern. Sound can levitate objects through acoustic levitation, holding small items suspended in midair at the nodes of powerful standing waves. Focused ultrasound can heat tissue deep within the body for medical treatments, or break up kidney stones without surgery. Sound can even influence how materials crystallize and how cells grow. In a very real sense, sound does shape reality, does organize matter, does create form from formlessness, not in the metaphysical way ancient myth suggested, but through physical mechanisms that are no less wondrous for being understood. The Hindu sages who meditated on Om as the fundamental vibration of existence, the Aboriginal singers who navigated their land through song, the temple builders who designed spaces to resonate with sacred frequencies, all of them intuited something true about the creative power of vibration, of pattern, of rhythmic energy moving through the world. And as you rest here, your own body is alive with sound and vibration, your heart drumming its steady rhythm, your breath flowing in and out like gentle waves on a shore, your cells vibrating at their characteristic frequencies, all of it a complex symphony of oscillations that is the physical expression of your being alive, your existence as a pattern of organized energy, temporary and precious, held together by forces both understood and mysterious. The earth that shakes beneath us, the crystals that grow in hidden darkness, the clouds that form and dissolve in endless transformation, the sound that shapes and creates, all of it part of the great dance of matter and energy, and we who observe it are part of that dance, made of the same atoms, following the same laws, temporary patterns of complexity in an ancient. In this gentle descent toward sleep, let us consider something both ordinary and extraordinary, the phenomenon of light itself, that fundamental aspect of existence without which there would be no sight, no color, no visible world at all. Ancient peoples revered light as divine, as the first creation, as the opposite of chaos and void. The Egyptian sun god Ra traveled across the sky each day in his solar bark, doing battle each night with the serpent of darkness, Apophis, to ensure the sun would rise again. Persian Zoroastrianism centered on Ahura Mazda, the lord of light and wisdom, eternally struggling against Angra Mainyu, the spirit of darkness and deception. Light wasn't just illumination but represented order, truth, knowledge, goodness itself, while darkness embodied confusion, ignorance, and evil. This wasn't merely poetic symbolism. For beings who evolved in a world governed by day and night, light genuinely meant safety, warmth, the ability to see predators and find food, while darkness brought vulnerability and danger. Our circadian rhythms, our internal biological clocks, are synchronized by light, telling our bodies when to be alert and when to rest. Light triggers the suppression of melatonin, the hormone that makes us sleepy, which is why dawn naturally wakes us and why darkness invites slumber. Ancient peoples who spoke of light as life-giving weren't speaking metaphorically. They were observing a biological truth that science would eventually explain in terms of photoreceptors and hormones and neural pathways. Modern physics has revealed that light is both particle and wave, photons that behave in ways that seem paradoxical to our everyday intuitions. Light is electromagnetic radiation, ripples in the electromagnetic field traveling at the universe's ultimate speed limit, 299,792,458 meters per second in vacuum, a constant so fundamental it defines our measurements of space and time. What we call visible light is just a tiny slice of the electromagnetic spectrum, wavelengths between about 380 and 700 nanometers that our eyes evolved to detect because this range passes well through Earth's atmosphere and through water. Other creatures see different portions of the spectrum. Bees perceive ultraviolet light invisible to us, while pit vipers sense infrared radiation that we experience only as warmth. Einstein's theory of relativity revealed something even more profound. Light speed is the same for all observers regardless of their motion, and nothing in the universe can travel faster. This seemingly simple fact has extraordinary implications. It means that space and time are not absolute but relative, that simultaneity is observer-dependent, that massive objects warp spacetime itself. The ancient reverence for light as something fundamental, something unlike ordinary matter, something connected to the very structure of reality, turns out to have been more insightful than anyone could have imagined. Light isn't just how we see the world, it's woven into the fabric of the cosmos itself. Let us turn now from light to its absence, to darkness, not as evil or void but as its own phenomenon, its own teacher. Many spiritual traditions have practiced darkness retreats, spending days or weeks in complete absence of light as a path to insight and transformation. Tibetan Buddhist practitioners enter dark meditation caves for extended periods. Ancient mystery religions conducted initiation rites in darkness. Sensory deprivation, including darkness, was used by mystics and shamans to induce altered states of consciousness, visions, and what they interpreted as contact with spiritual realms. Modern neuroscience has discovered that darkness does indeed affect consciousness in profound ways. When deprived of visual input, the brain doesn't simply rest but rather begins generating its own imagery, hallucinations that can be vivid and complex. The visual cortex, accustomed to processing continuous input from the eyes, starts firing spontaneously when that input is removed, creating phosphons, geometric patterns, and eventually elaborate visions. Extended time in darkness can lead to altered time perception, changes in sense of self, and states that feel profoundly different from ordinary consciousness. Moreover, darkness triggers the production of melatonin, but extended darkness produces another remarkable effect. The pineal gland, that small endocrine organ deep in the brain that ancient mystics called the third eye, begins producing other compounds when melatonin accumulates. Some researchers have suggested that prolonged darkness might trigger the production of substances like pinoline and DMT, naturally occurring compounds that could contribute to the visionary experiences reported by darkness retreat practitioners. While this research remains somewhat speculative, it suggests that the ancient practices of darkness meditation may have been sophisticated techniques for manipulating neurochemistry through environmental control. The mystics who spoke of finding illumination in darkness, of encountering the divine in the void, were describing real neurological phenomena, not supernatural contact, perhaps, but genuine altered states of consciousness produced by the interaction between environmental conditions and brain chemistry. The darkness wasn't empty but full of the mind's own creative power, revealed when external stimuli fall away. Now let us consider something that exists in the in-between spaces, mist and fog, those conditions where air and water merge, where visibility fails, where the familiar becomes strange and uncertain. Foggy conditions appear throughout folklore as liminal states, times when the boundary between the mundane world and the other world grows thin. Celtic traditions spoke of the mists of Avalon, that mysterious island existing partly in and partly beyond the mortal realm. Japanese folklore tells of kitsune, fox spirits, who create illusions in the fog to deceive travelers. In European traditions, fog was often considered dangerous, a time when spirits walked abroad, when one might accidentally cross into fairy realms and lose one's way entirely, emerging hours or years later to find the world changed. These weren't irrational fears. Fog genuinely is dangerous. Visibility drops dramatically, landmarks disappear, sounds behave strangely, and travelers can become disoriented even in familiar territory. Before modern navigation aids, fog at sea could mean disaster, ships running aground or colliding because they couldn't see where they were going. On land, people could walk in circles, lose their sense of direction, stumble into bogs or off cliffs. The folklore that treated fog as a time of danger and disorientation was practical safety advice wrapped in supernatural narrative. Science explains fog as clouds at ground level, water vapor condensing into tiny droplets suspended in air, usually forming when warm, moist air cools or when cold air moves over warm water. Different types of fog form under different conditions: radiation fog in calm, clear nights when the ground cools, advection fog when warm air moves over cold surfaces, evaporation fog when cold air moves over warm water. Each droplet is tiny, but collectively they scatter light so effectively that even powerful beams penetrate only a short distance through thick fog. What's fascinating is how fog affects not just vision but also hearing. Sound behaves oddly in fog, sometimes muffled and damped, sometimes seeming to come from wrong directions, sometimes traveling farther than usual. This happens because the fog droplets absorb high-frequency sounds while reflecting and refracting lower frequencies, and because fog often forms under temperature inversion conditions where sound waves bend in unusual ways. The eerie acoustic properties of fog that made ancient peoples think spirits were abroad have physical explanations, but knowing the physics doesn't make the experience less disorienting, less uncanny. There's something profoundly appropriate about fog as a symbol for the uncertain, the liminal, the in-between. It is literally matter in transition, not quite liquid, not quite gas, but suspended between states. Visibility fades gradually rather than sharply. There's no clear boundary between where you can see and where you cannot, just a gradual diminishing into whiteness or grayness. Fog reminds us that the world is not always clear and distinct, that boundaries can be blurred, that sometimes we must navigate by feel and memory rather than by sight, trusting our other senses when vision fails. Let us move now to something that ancient peoples encountered with awe and terror: lightning, that sudden electric fire that splits the sky and speaks with a voice of thunder. Zeus wielded lightning bolts as weapons, hurling them from Olympus to strike those who offended him. The Norse god Thor threw his hammer Mjolnir, creating lightning and thunder with each throw. In Hindu tradition, Indra the storm god carried a lightning weapon called Vajra, the thunderbolt. Across cultures, lightning was divine power made visible, the gods reaching down from heaven to touch earth with destructive force. The fear was entirely justified. Lightning can heat the air around it to temperatures 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun, about 30,000 Kelvin. It can carry 1 billion volts and hundreds of thousands of amperes of current. A direct lightning strike can kill instantly, stopping the heart or causing catastrophic burns. Trees explode when lightning strikes them, the sap inside vaporizing so rapidly it blasts the tree apart. Sand can be fused into glass tubes called fulgurites, hollow formations that preserve the path the lightning took through the ground. Buildings could be destroyed, fires started, people killed by what seemed like divine judgment striking from clear sky. Modern science understands lightning as atmospheric electricity, charge separation in storm clouds creating potential differences of millions of volts between cloud and ground, or between different parts of clouds. When the electric field becomes strong enough, it tears electrons from air molecules, creating a conductive channel through which current can flow. The lightning bolt is that current, equalizing the charge difference in a fraction of a second. Thunder is the sound of air explosively expanding as it's superheated by the lightning, a sonic boom that rolls and echoes through the sky. Benjamin Franklin's famous experiment with a kite and a key, which was far more dangerous than most people realize and could easily have killed him, demonstrated that lightning is electricity, the same force that could be generated in laboratories and studied in controlled conditions. This was one of those pivotal moments when something divine was revealed to be natural, when a weapon of the gods became a phenomenon that could be understood, predicted, even controlled. The invention of the lightning rod, allowing the immense power of lightning to be safely channeled into the ground, was humanity's first real protection against this ancient terror. Yet knowing the mechanism doesn't entirely dispel the awe. A lightning bolt is still one of nature's most dramatic displays of power, a reminder that vast energies flow through our atmosphere, that forces beyond human scale and human control play out above our heads. Standing in a storm, seeing lightning arc across the sky and feeling the thunder resonate in your chest, there's still something primal in the response, some ancient recognition that this is power that demands respect, whether we call it Zeus or electrostatic discharge. And here, as the storm passes and the thunder fades to distant rumbling, as the rain becomes gentle and the lightning moves on to flash against far horizons, we find ourselves again in that space of in-between, that threshold where the dramatic becomes subtle, where the wakeful begins its transition into sleep, where consciousness doesn't end but shifts, transforms, moves into different patterns like light refracting through mist. Light and darkness, fog and clarity, the electric fire that connects sky and earth, all of these teach us about transitions, about states that shift and change, about how the world is never static but always moving, always transforming, always dancing between opposites that are not truly opposite but rather different expressions of the same underlying reality. And as your own consciousness drifts now between waking and sleeping, between thought and dream, you participate in that same dance, that same transformation, following patterns as old as the earth itself, as natural as fog forming in a valley, as inevitable as darkness following light. In this deep quietness, let us turn our attention to something so familiar we rarely consider it: the ground beneath us, the soil that sustains all terrestrial life. Ancient peoples knew the earth was sacred, fertile, the great mother from which all life emerged and to which all life returned. Cultures across the world performed rituals to honor the soil, to ensure its fertility, to maintain the covenant between humans and the land that fed them. The Romans had their goddess Terra Mater, Mother Earth. The Greeks spoke of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, whose grief at losing her daughter caused winter's barrenness and whose joy brought spring's abundance. Indigenous peoples worldwide spoke of Earth as living, conscious, deserving of reciprocity and respect. You take from the earth, you must give back, or the relationship breaks and the land becomes barren. These weren't quaint beliefs but recognition of something profound, that human survival depends entirely on a thin layer of soil, just the top few inches of the earth's crust where life and rock meet and transform each other. Traditional farmers knew this intimately. They understood that soil could be exhausted, could lose its power to grow crops, could become dusty and lifeless if not properly tended. They developed complex practices to maintain soil health, crop rotation, letting fields lie fallow, adding animal manure and plant matter back into the earth. These practices were often wrapped in ritual and ceremony, but they were fundamentally sound agricultural science, passed down through generations of careful observation. Modern soil science has revealed that healthy soil is astonishingly complex, not dead mineral matter but a living ecosystem as intricate and interconnected as a rainforest. A single teaspoon of healthy soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth, billions of bacteria, miles of fungal hyphae, countless protozoa, nematodes, and other microscopic life forms. These organisms break down organic matter, making nutrients available to plants. They form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, exchanging nutrients for sugars. They create the soil structure itself, binding mineral particles with organic compounds into the crumbly texture that holds both water and air, that allows roots to penetrate and water to drain. This underground ecosystem is what makes life on land possible. Plants cannot directly absorb most minerals locked in rock. They depend on this community of soil organisms to transform stone into food. When ancient peoples spoke of Earth as alive, as a mother who nurtures and sustains, they were describing literal truth in metaphorical language. The soil does live, does give life, does require care and reciprocity. Industrial agriculture that treats soil as an inert medium to be amended with chemical fertilizers has learned this lesson harshly. Soil degradation is now recognized as one of the critical environmental challenges facing humanity, a slow crisis as significant as climate change but far less discussed. Let us move now from the earth to what grows from it, the humble mushroom, those strange fruiting bodies that appear overnight, particularly after rain, as if spontaneously generated from nothing. Mushrooms occupy a peculiar place in folklore, associated with magic, with fairy rings and enchantment, with poison and with healing. European traditions spoke of fairy rings, circular formations of mushrooms in meadows, as places where fairies danced at night, and to step inside such a ring was to risk being spirited away into the fairy realm, lost to the mortal world. Some mushrooms were known to cause visions and strange mental states, which shamanic traditions across continents incorporated into spiritual practices. The Amanita muscaria, the red mushroom with white spots that appears in countless fairy tale illustrations, was used in Siberian shamanic rituals for its psychoactive properties. Other mushrooms were deadly. The aptly named death cap, Amanita phalodes, looks innocuous but contains toxins that destroy the liver and kidneys, killing even healthy adults who eat just a small amount. The delay between consumption and symptoms means victims often don't realize what they've eaten until it's too late for treatment. This danger made mushrooms mysterious and somewhat fearsome. They could heal or kill, could open doors to other worlds or simply provide nourishment, and telling the difference required hard-won knowledge that was carefully preserved and passed down. Modern biology has revealed that mushrooms are even stranger than folklore imagined. They are not plants but fungi, an entirely separate kingdom of life more closely related to animals than to plants. The mushroom itself is just the reproductive structure, the fruit of a much larger organism, the mycelium, a vast network of thread-like filaments that extends through the soil or through rotting wood, sometimes covering acres. The largest organism on Earth is a honey fungus in Oregon whose mycelium extends through more than 2,300 acres of forest, estimated to be thousands of years old. Fungi are the great decomposers, breaking down dead plant and animal matter and returning nutrients to the soil. Without fungi, dead material would accumulate indefinitely, locking away essential nutrients. But fungi do more than decompose. They form mycorrhizal partnerships with most plant species, fungal threads interweaving with plant roots in relationships of mutual benefit. The fungi receive sugars from the plant's photosynthesis, while the plant receives water and minerals gathered by the far-reaching fungal network. Some species even connect different plants through these networks, allowing them to share resources and possibly information, a wood wide web beneath the visible forest. And those psychoactive mushrooms that shamans used? They contain compounds like psilocybin that affect serotonin receptors in the brain, profoundly altering consciousness and perception. Recent medical research has found that psilocybin, administered in controlled therapeutic settings, can effectively treat depression, anxiety, and PTSD, often with a single session producing lasting benefits. The ancient shamanic intuition that these mushrooms could heal mental and spiritual ailments is being validated by neuroscience and psychiatry, though now we frame it in terms of neuroplasticity, default mode network disruption, and therapeutic integration rather than spirit journeys. Different language, similar recognition of genuine healing potential. Let us drift now to another phenomenon that ancient peoples observed with careful attention: the tides, the twice-daily rhythm of waters rising and falling along every coast. Coastal peoples worldwide noticed that tides correlated with the moon's position in the sky. High tides occurred when the moon was overhead and again when the moon was on the opposite side of the earth. Spring tides, the highest highs and lowest lows, occurred at new and full moons, when sun and moon aligned. Neap tides, the most modest tidal ranges, occurred at the moon's quarters, when sun and moon pulled at right angles to each other. This observation appears in many mythologies. The Maori people of New Zealand told of the moon goddess Rona, who controls the tides. Polynesian navigators, who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in outrigger canoes, possessed sophisticated knowledge of tidal patterns and currents, knowledge encoded in chants and stories that served as navigational aids. They knew when tides would help or hinder their voyages, which passages through reefs could be traversed at which tides, where tidal currents would sweep them if they misjudged. This knowledge was survival, dressed in mythology that made it memorable and transmissible across generations. Isaac Newton explained tides through his law of universal gravitation. The moon's gravity pulls on Earth, but it pulls more strongly on the side of Earth nearest to it and less strongly on the far side. This difference, this tidal force, creates two bulges in Earth's oceans, one pointing toward the moon and one pointing away. As Earth rotates beneath these bulges, any given point on the coast experiences two high tides and two low tides each day. The sun also creates tidal forces, smaller than the moon's because the sun, though vastly more massive, is vastly more distant. When sun and moon align, their tidal forces add together, creating spring tides. When they pull at right angles, their forces partially cancel, creating neap tides. But tides don't just move water, they affect the Earth itself. The solid planet experiences tidal deformation, rising and falling by about a foot as the moon passes overhead, though we never notice because we rise and fall with the ground beneath us. The friction of tides gradually slows Earth's rotation. Our days are getting longer by about 1.7 milliseconds per century. The same tidal forces have locked the moon's rotation to its orbit, which is why we always see the same face of the moon. Eventually, billions of years from now, Earth's rotation will also lock to the moon, and both will perpetually show the same face to each other, though the sun will likely have rendered this mutual gaze meaningless by then. The ancient peoples who organized their lives around tidal rhythms, who felt connected to the moon's pull through the rising and falling of waters, were recognizing their participation in gravitational dance between celestial bodies, a physical connection between Earth and Moon, mediated through water, as real as any force in nature. Now let us consider something so commonplace we barely notice it, the warmth of the sun on skin, the way sunlight makes us feel more alive, more energetic, more hopeful. Sun worship appears in nearly every ancient culture. The Egyptian Ra, the Greek Helios, the Aztec Huitzilopochtli, the Norse Sol, the Hindu Suya, the Incan Inti. The sun was revered as the supreme life-giver, and its daily journey across the sky was watched with reverence and sometimes anxiety. Would it return tomorrow? At winter solstice, when days were shortest and the sun seemed to be dying, many cultures performed rituals to ensure its return, to strengthen it, to coax it back toward summer's abundance. These weren't irrational fears. Humans who lived close to the land knew viscerally that the sun's warmth meant life. Crops grew in sunshine, withered in its absence. Cold brought hardship, hunger, death. The sun's annual journey, high in summer, low in winter, determined whether communities would feast or starve. Honoring the sun was honoring the source of all food, all warmth, all energy that sustains life on Earth. Modern science confirms this with even greater precision. Essentially all energy that powers life on Earth comes from the sun. Plants capture sunlight through photosynthesis, using that energy to build sugars from carbon dioxide and water. Animals eat plants, or eat other animals that ate plants, and the energy that moves through all food webs originates in captured sunlight. The fossil fuels that powered the Industrial Revolution are ancient sunlight, stored millions of years ago by plants and microscopic marine organisms, now released back into the atmosphere. Wind and waves are caused by uneven solar heating of Earth's surface. Even geothermal energy and nuclear energy ultimately trace back to stellar nucleosynthesis, the fusion reactions in stars, including the supernova that forged the heavy elements that comprise our planet. But sunlight also directly affects human health and mood in ways ancient peoples intuited but couldn't explain. Sunlight striking the skin triggers vitamin D production, essential for bone health, immune function, and numerous other physiological processes. Sunlight entering the eyes regulates our circadian rhythms, telling our bodies when to be alert and when to sleep. Seasonal affective disorder, depression that strikes in winter months when daylight is scarce, demonstrates how deeply we depend on sunlight for psychological well-being. Light therapy, simply exposure to bright light that mimics sunshine, can effectively treat this condition. The sun worshippers who turned their faces to the light, who felt their spirits lift as winter gave way to spring's returning warmth, who understood the sun as the fundamental life-giver, they were right in every way that matters, even if they didn't know about photosynthesis and vitamin D synthesis and circadian biology. And so we see, again and again, that wisdom comes in many forms, that truth speaks in many languages, that our ancestors were not foolish but observant, not primitive but keenly aware of the forces that shaped their lives. They wrapped their observations in story and symbol, in ritual and reverence, because these forms preserved knowledge across generations and connected that knowledge to meaning, to purpose, to the sense that human life is woven into larger patterns. In this deepening stillness, let us turn our thoughts to something ancient peoples knew with certainty, that the night sky slowly changes, that the stars themselves move in great cycles spanning lifetimes. The ancient astronomers of Babylon, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica tracked these movements with remarkable precision, not with telescopes but with patient observation across generations. They noticed that the position of the sunrise on the horizon shifted throughout the year, reaching its northernmost point at summer solstice and its southernmost at winter solstice. They observed that the point where the sun crosses the celestial equator at spring equinox slowly shifts against the background stars, taking approximately 26,000 years to complete one full cycle, a phenomenon we now call the precession of the equinoxes. The ancient Greeks knew of this precession, discovered by Hipparchus around 130 BCE. Different cultures incorporated it into their cosmologies in various ways. Hindu astronomy described great cosmic cycles called yugas, ages of the world lasting thousands of years. The Maya developed calendars of extraordinary complexity, tracking not just the sun and moon but Venus and other planets through cycles within cycles, all precisely calculated and recorded in stone. These weren't primitive peoples making lucky guesses, they were sophisticated astronomers conducting multi-generational observational programs, creating predictive models of celestial mechanics without any instruments beyond the naked eye and careful record-keeping. Modern astronomy explains precession as a wobble in Earth's axis of rotation, caused by the gravitational pull of the sun and moon on Earth's equatorial bulge. Like a spinning top that wobbles as it slows, Earth's axis traces a slow circle against the background stars, taking about 26,000 years to complete. This means that Polaris, our current North Star, wasn't always the pole star and won't always be. In ancient Egyptian times, Thuban in the constellation Draco marked celestial north. In about 12,000 years, the bright star Vega will be the North Star. The fixed stars are not fixed at all, at least not from Earth's perspective. Everything moves, everything changes, given enough time. What's remarkable is that ancient peoples tracked these movements accurately enough to notice precession at all. It shifts the position of the equinoxes by only about 1 degree every 72 years, a tiny change, barely perceptible in a single lifetime, requiring meticulous records maintained across centuries to detect. That multiple ancient civilizations independently discovered this phenomenon speaks to their dedication to observation, to record-keeping, to understanding the cosmos through patient attention sustained across generations. They were doing science, even if they expressed their findings through mythological frameworks. Let us drift now from the vast cycles of the heavens to something more intimate, the phenomenon of fever, that burning heat that overtakes the body during illness. Ancient peoples across cultures recognized fever as significant, though they disagreed on its meaning. Some traditions saw fever as the body's attempt to fight illness, to burn out impurity or infection. Traditional Chinese medicine viewed fever as an imbalance between yin and yang, an excess of yang heat that needed to be cooled and balanced. European humoral theory considered fever an excess of yellow bile, requiring treatment to restore equilibrium. Other cultures saw fever as possession by spirits, requiring exorcism or ritual to drive out the invading entity. The treatments varied accordingly. Some traditions encouraged sweating to release the illness through the skin. Others prescribed cooling herbs and compresses. Some used bloodletting to reduce the supposed excess of heated blood. Prayer, ritual, amulets, all were employed against the burning sickness that could kill, especially in children or the elderly. What nearly everyone agreed on was that very high fever was dangerous, that the body burning too hot for too long meant death approached. Modern medicine understands fever as part of the immune response. When the body detects infection, the hypothalamus, the brain's thermostat, resets to a higher temperature. This isn't malfunction but strategy. Many pathogens, bacteria, viruses, parasites, function optimally at normal body temperature but struggle at higher temperatures. Meanwhile, the immune system works more efficiently when slightly elevated. A fever of 102 degrees Fahrenheit or so actually helps fight infection. The body is literally creating an inhospitable environment for invaders while activating its defensive systems more effectively. Those ancient traditions that recognized fever as the body fighting illness were fundamentally correct. However, very high fever, above 104 degrees Fahrenheit, can become dangerous, potentially causing seizures or, in extreme cases, damaging proteins and cellular structures. The traditional fear of sustained high fever was well-founded. The challenge has always been distinguishing beneficial fever that should be allowed to run its course from dangerous fever that requires intervention, a judgment that traditional healers made through experience and that modern medicine makes through thermometers and an understanding of fever's mechanisms. Interestingly, some recent research suggests that the modern tendency to immediately suppress any fever with medications might sometimes interfere with the body's healing process, that low-grade fevers might best be left alone unless they cause significant discomfort. This represents a partial return to older wisdom that saw fever as ally rather than enemy, that understood the body's intelligence in its responses to illness. Now let us consider something that exists at the boundary between the living and the non-living, viruses, those entities so small they remained invisible until the 20th century but whose effects have shaped human history more profoundly than any war or empire. Ancient peoples knew of plagues and pestilences, diseases that swept through populations leaving death in their wake. The Bible describes plagues sent as divine punishment. The ancient Greeks experienced waves of disease during their wars. The Black Death of medieval Europe killed perhaps a third of the population, and people attributed it to everything from divine wrath to poisoned wells to bad air, miasma, rising from swamps and corpses. Quarantine, isolating the sick from the healthy, was practiced in various forms by many cultures, suggesting some intuitive understanding that disease could spread from person to person. The word quarantine itself comes from the Italian quarantina, meaning 40 days, the period ships arriving in Venice during the Black Death had to wait before passengers could disembark. This waiting period was based partly on biblical precedent and partly on practical observation that disease either manifested or didn't within that time frame. Modern virology has revealed that viruses are stranger than anyone imagined, not quite alive in the traditional sense, but not exactly non-living either. A virus is essentially genetic information, DNA or RNA, wrapped in a protein coat, sometimes with an outer envelope of stolen cell membrane. Outside a host cell, a virus is inert, a crystal of protein and nucleic acid that doesn't eat, doesn't metabolize, doesn't reproduce, doesn't even move on its own. But when a virus encounters the right host cell, it hijacks that cell's machinery, forcing it to produce copies of the virus instead of performing its normal functions. The cell becomes a virus factory, churning out thousands of copies before bursting open, releasing those copies to infect more cells. Viruses exist at the very edge of what we call life. They evolve, reproduce, and adapt, characteristics we associate with living things, yet they cannot do any of this without parasitizing actual living cells. They are obligate parasites, incapable of independent existence. Some scientists consider them the ultimate minimalists, stripped down to bare essentials, just enough information to hijack a cell and replicate. Others see them as escaped pieces of cellular machinery, genetic elements that gain the ability to move between cells and between organisms. What's fascinating is that viruses have been fundamental to evolution. Much of the human genome, perhaps 8%, consists of ancient viral DNA, remnants of infections that got permanently incorporated into our ancestors' genetic material. Some of these viral sequences now serve important functions, including some involved in pregnancy and embryonic development. The placenta that nourishes developing human fetuses uses proteins originally coded by viral genes. Viruses have been not just threats but also, inadvertently, contributors to the evolutionary innovations that made complex life possible. The ancient intuition that disease could spread from person to person through some invisible means was absolutely correct, as was the practical measure of quarantine. People didn't need to see viruses to observe their effects and develop strategies to minimize their spread. The 40-day quarantine period that medieval Venice established? While based partly on religious symbolism, it was actually long enough for most viral diseases to manifest or resolve, making it an effective if unintentionally so public health measure. Let us move now from the infinitesimally small to something experienced at human scale, the phenomenon of pain, that universal experience that warns us of injury and illness. Ancient peoples understood pain as significant, though its interpretation varied. Some saw it as punishment from gods or spirits, others as imbalance requiring restoration, still others as simply a fact of existence to be endured. Traditional medicines worldwide developed pain remedies, opium from poppies, willow bark containing salicylic acid, various herbs and substances that dulled suffering or brought unconsciousness. Shamanic traditions sometimes inflicted pain deliberately in initiation rituals, believing that intense physical suffering could open doorways to spiritual insight, could bring visions, could transform the initiate. Whether through fasting, scarification, sleep deprivation, or other ordeals, many cultures incorporated controlled suffering into their spiritual practices. Modern neuroscience has revealed that pain is far more complex than simple sensation. It's a constructed experience, assembled by the brain from multiple inputs and profoundly influenced by context, expectation, and meaning. Pain receptors called nociceptors detect tissue damage and send signals to the spinal cord and brain, but these signals don't directly create the experience of pain. Instead, the brain interprets these signals in light of all available information. This is why soldiers in battle sometimes don't notice severe injuries until later. The brain, focused on survival, temporarily suppresses pain signals. It's why placebos can reduce pain even though they have no pharmacological action. Expectation of relief partially activates the brain's own pain-suppressing systems. The brain produces endogenous opioids, endorphins and enkephalins, that bind to the same receptors as morphine and heroin, providing natural pain relief. Intense exercise, meditation, certain kinds of stress, even listening to music can trigger endorphin release. Those shamanic practices that induced altered states through ordeal? They may have been sophisticated techniques for triggering the brain's own pain-suppressing and consciousness-altering neurochemistry. Intense pain, when voluntarily accepted in a meaningful context, can indeed produce profound psychological experiences, not through mystical means but through the interaction of stress, endorphins, and other neurochemicals released during extreme experiences. Chronic pain, however, represents a dysregulation of this system, pain persisting long after any injury has healed, pain without clear cause, the nervous system itself becoming the problem. Modern pain science increasingly recognizes that treating chronic pain requires addressing not just tissue damage but also the nervous system's learned patterns, the brain's pain-processing networks, and the psychological and social contexts that influence pain perception. This represents a kind of integration of ancient wisdom, that pain is not purely physical but involves mind, meaning, and context, with modern understanding of neuroplasticity and the complexity of nervous system function. And as you rest here, your own nervous system is calibrating itself in darkness, in stillness, in the absence of demand. Pain signals quiet when we rest, when we feel safe, when we release into sleep's embrace. The body knows what it needs, this ancient wisdom written into every cell, older than thought, deeper than consciousness, the accumulated learning of billions of years of life adapting, surviving, healing, enduring. The great cycles of stars turning through millennia, the fever that burns to cleanse, the viruses that exist at the edge of life itself, the pain that signals and teaches and sometimes misleads, all of these part of the intricate dance of existence, all of these threads in the vast tapestry of being, and you are woven into that tapestry, inseparable from it, made of the same matter, following the same laws, participating in the same ancient patterns. And in this participation, in this belonging to something so much vaster than any individual life, there is a kind of peace, a recognition that you are held by forces and patterns that have sustained life through unimaginable time, that will continue long after you, that connect you to everything that has ever lived and ever will live. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe below to hear more relaxing and interesting facts on your favorite topics.